Hello and welcome to the next part review summary of The Collider 2. This is a game by Short Break Studios, and this is a sequel to what was originally a mobile title, quite simplistic in nature. But this one's been redone and remade in Unreal Engine 4, and they've added quite a lot of different mechanics and systems to the game just to make it a little bit more interesting, have a little bit more depth, but still retaining some of that simplicity around the game that makes it such an easy title to pick up and play, and just visually quite good looking. The game advertises itself as quite a fast-paced, I guess like a puzzle racer, very similar to F-Zero, but more of a mobile title, I guess. Except I feel like they've made enough advancements in this that it's not just simply a mobile port. It does in itself feel like a solid, reasonable, average PC title. This game is extremely fast-paced, very, very fast-paced. Initially, when I was playing through the tutorial and the first few levels in the original sector, it was a little bit slow going because you're getting to grips with some of the controls. Although the controls are surprisingly simple, you can use the analog stick and a single button to boost, so it's very, very easy to pick up and play. And it starts off slow just to get used to things, but very, very quickly picks up the pace. The game's sort of got like these 54 different levels, and they're all split across like half a dozen sectors or so, or 5 sectors, and the sectors are all quite different. So when you go through the first one, it will sort of put these certain types of puzzles in front of you that you will sort of get used to in the first sector, but thankfully it doesn't get too repetitive in the whole of the game, because by the time you move on to the other ones, they introduce these alternative puzzles, and the levels end up moving around and rotating, and you're faced with different options, and it just makes sure that the player doesn't necessarily get bored of the same repetitive gameplay over and over again. So they've done quite well on that part. And they've also surprisingly added like these weird little mini boss fights, I guess. In the initial sector you won't see one. I don't think there's one in the second sector, but in the third, fourth and fifth and onwards there is, and they're quite interesting, and it sort of caught me by surprise. I didn't expect them to be able to throw that kind of gameplay into this sort of game, but they did manage it. It's very challenging and it's quite interesting, and when you get to the end of a sector, it's just a nice way to sort of challenge the player suddenly, and make them do something that they haven't necessarily seen in the game before. So the boss fights are a pretty cool addition, although they're not particularly in great numbers, so they're sort of like a rarity. The game is incredibly challenging. To start off with, you obviously do the tutorial on the first few sectors quite easily. However, there is an issue with some of the skill curve, which I'll go into in a bit. But for the most part, it is quite a challenging title, and I'd say about 80 to 90% of the time the skill curve is quite well done, and this is sort of in conjunction with the persistent content such as the unlocks, because in this game you can unlock new ships, get new paint jobs, upgrade the ships, and get sort of global passives which will increase the duration of power-ups when you pick them up. And sort of the way I discovered unlocking ships and stuff like that is it seemed to be in direct conjunction with the amount of content you completed, the amount of rewards you'd get for that content. So it felt like you were getting the upgrades at the right time for the most part. The only thing I did find slightly annoying is when you failed a mission in a certain fashion, the game would go, oh hey, you need to go get these upgrades, and it will make you be able to complete the game. But it doesn't. In realism, well, yeah, you basically have to just get very lucky, and it's more of a game about memorization as opposed to skill in some instances, because a lot of the levels which suddenly get really difficult out in the middle of nowhere, which is why I found the difficulty curve a little bit erratic at times. You'd blitz through an entire sector, and then you'd get to one level and spend half an hour trying to deal with it, because it's not unfair. It just puts a very awkward situation in an area and puts you on a time limit as well, so you're more likely to fuck up and make a few mistakes. And it's just sort of, it feels like the game has this really great curve going on, but it just throws in these random bits, and they're all the same type of missions. They're all the scout missions, which is the ones where you have to complete the level within a certain time limit. Now, not all of the scout missions are necessarily too difficult, and you can sort of get yourself around them, but there are specific scout missions, and it was only the scout missions I had problems with, and they were very complicated, and they were timed. But there were these certain ones where basically you would need to memorize the course instead of necessarily be good. You would just have to know what's coming up next and deal with it. And it was more of a case of you'd complete the level because you'd played it so many times and you just knew it off by heart, as opposed to completing the level because you would learn how to play well. And so the difficulty curve is a little bit of an oddity at times, and that was probably my primary source of frustration throughout the whole game. The other thing is that there's basically no video options, although thankfully it does have 4K, and it does have a VSync option instead of forcing it for those people on 144Hz monitors. But when you change around the resolution, there's also a sensitivity slider, and if you change the resolution, it directly affects your sensitivity in game. And of course, this is all about movement, so you need to have your sensitivity nailed down and, you know, have the confidence that what you're setting at is what it's actually going to do. Except when I changed the resolution a few times to do some benchmarks and then set the sensitivity up and down and kept applying the changes, nothing was really happening. And so I ended up just changing the resolution to what I needed it to be, setting the sensitivity, and restarting the game about a dozen times just to make sure that everything was set. And even then it was a little bit weird. And going back to 4K, I felt like the game was harder on 4K simply because the sensitivity was far, far lower than on 1080p. Even when I had it maxed out, it was just completely weird and strange and a little bit annoying, to be perfectly honest. The other thing with this type of game is, as I went into it, I knew with the type of game it was a simplistic sort of mobile style title in the beginning. It does get repetitive, particularly when you get to those scout missions that you'll spend half an hour to an hour trying to complete the same thing over and over and over again. So for those of you who are fans of roguelikes or stuff like that, but you know, it does have a little bit of persistence, you won't mind it so much. But for those people that are jumping into this game just for a bit of casual fun, just for a bit of challenge, if you just want to wind down and play a game just to have a little bit of entertainment, then those parts can get extremely frustrating, and it gets so repetitive that at times I just thought, I don't want to play this anymore, I can't be bothered. The other final small niggle I have with the game is the power-ups, because they're interesting for sure, but I kind of feel like they were grasping at straws in order to fill the game with more power-ups, and there's only 3. But to be fair, one of them feels kind of useless, because throughout every level you can collect currency, which is what you use to upgrade, although you get the most simply by completing missions and getting 1 to 3 stars in them or whatever. But you can collect these currencies and it'll affect the way you travel through the level. And you can get this upgrade, which is just a magnet, and it lasts for 10 seconds or so, and it will just absorb everything that you can collect for those 10 seconds. You won't have to move around. You can focus on just not dying, basically. But collecting everything didn't feel like a worthwhile use of a power-up. It felt kind of pointless, to be perfectly honest, because the amount of pickups you would get from that magnet would not really help you in any way, because it was so few in comparison to the reward from just completing the level as normal. And then there's 2 other power-ups. The shield one, which is blatantly the most overpowered, excellent power-up that you're going to pray for every single time, which means when you go through some of these walls or blockades or whatever, you can just go straight through them instead of dodging them with the shield. And I found myself praying for them in some of the scout missions just so I could hold the booster down and go straight through them. And then there's the other power-up is kind of interesting because it's sort of like a positive and negative at the same time, because when you're boosting, your ship overheats and you can only boost for so long and then you have to let it cool down. But this power-up allows you to boost forever without generating heat until the power runs out. Except, obviously, because this is a very fast-paced game and you're trying to dodge all these things, you kind of have to manage when you're boosting and when you're going slightly slower. But again, if you're against the clock, you're trying to take risks. So that power-up in itself and the shield power-up do sort of add to the game, make it a little bit more interesting, and, you know, you actually want to get them. Whereas the magnet is pointless and there aren't any other power-ups, so they're sort of few and far between. And so it just felt like they had added them because some of them were useful and then just added an extra on because they felt like they needed to add more. But I feel like there could have been some slightly more interesting ones. But overall, the game is not bad. I wouldn't say it's an amazing title. It's not like the best game I've played in the last few weeks. There's certainly better titles, but it's not terrible at the same time. It just has a few issues. It is, at its core, coming from a mobile title, so you have to bear that in mind. But, you know, if you're not looking to spend an awful lot of time playing an RPG and remembering where you left off and having all this time invested, then, you know, it's the kind of game you'll be interested in. But at the same time, it does get quite repetitive. It is reasonably challenging, unreasonably challenging at times, and just has a couple of things which you might find a little bit irritating. So, kind of on the fence about this one. I'm not sure whether to go either way, but it looks nice and it plays nice and it's quite fast and it's relatively entertaining. Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this review. You can check out the full written review and performance analysis in the link below. And we'll see you on Saturday for our next Week in Gaming episode. And next Thursday, I think we'll be reviewing Battle Souls, the alpha/beta MOBA thing, I think. A little bit like Smite. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this, and we'll see you next week.